They called him the King of Wall Street, the man who could move markets with a single phone call, the self-made billionaire who built an empire from nothing. But what they didn't tell you, what the headlines buried beneath the scandal and the spectacle, was what happened after he lost it all. This is the untold story of a fallen billionaire. His name was Jonathan Pierce, 52 years old, a name that once commanded respect in every boardroom from New York to Hong Kong. For 30 years, he had been unstoppable. Investment firm, real estate portfolio worth billions, private jets, homes on 3 continents. The kind of success people write books about, the kind of life people dream of. Until one Monday morning in October when everything came crashing down. Federal investigators, fraud allegations, insider trading charges. The details don't matter now. What matters is that within 72 hours, Jonathan Pierce went from master of the universe to public enemy number 1. His assets frozen, his accounts seized, his reputation destroyed. The media feeding frenzy was relentless. Every news channel, every business publication, every social media platform had the same image, his face, with words like greed, corruption, fall from grace. But here's what they never showed you. The man sitting alone in a studio apartment he could barely afford, staring at walls that felt like they were closing in. The sleepless nights, the panic attacks, the suffocating realization that everything he had built his identity on had vanished overnight. Jonathan had spent 3 decades becoming someone. Now he was no one. And he had no idea how to exist in that void. The calls stopped immediately. Business partners who had laughed at his jokes and toasted his success suddenly couldn't remember his number. Friends he had supported through their own crises disappeared. Even his ex-wife, who had left him years earlier, sent a message through her lawyer. Please don't contact our children. They need space from this. Space from him. Space from the man he had become. Or maybe space from the man he had always been. Jonathan spent the first 2 weeks in complete isolation. He didn't leave the apartment, didn't answer the door, barely ate, just sat in the dark replaying every decision, every risk, every moment that had led to this. His mind was a prison more confining than any cell could be. The shame was crushing, the guilt overwhelming. And underneath it all, a question he couldn't escape. Who am I if I'm not successful? Who am I if I'm not him? On day 15, something shifted. Not hope, not acceptance, but exhaustion. Jonathan was tired of running from himself. Tired of the voice in his head that kept screaming about what he had lost. At 2 in the morning, he did something he hadn't done since he was a child. He wrote. Not a business plan or a strategy memo, just thoughts. Raw, unfiltered thoughts about who he was and who he had become. I don't know who I am, he wrote. I spent 30 years building a life I thought I wanted, but I never asked if it was the life that would make me whole. I never asked what would be left if it all disappeared. Now I know. Nothing. There's nothing left because I never built anything real. I built an image, a performance, a character the world would applaud. But underneath, I don't exist. Reading those words back, Jonathan felt something crack open inside him. Not his spirit, but his resistance to truth. For 3 decades he had been running, from a childhood of poverty, from the shame of not being enough, from the fear that if he ever stopped achieving, everyone would see he was a fraud. And now, with nowhere left to run, he had to face what he had been fleeing all along, himself. The next morning, Jonathan left the apartment for the first time in weeks. He walked through the city anonymously, just another face in the crowd. And for the first time in his adult life, that felt like freedom. No one stared. No one wanted anything from him. No one knew who he was or what he had lost. He was invisible. And in that invisibility, he discovered something unexpected: space to breathe.
He found himself in a part of the city he had never visited before, a neighborhood where life moved slower, where people sat on stoops talking to neighbors, where a small cafe served coffee without pretense. Jonathan went inside and sat by the window. An older man at the next table was reading a worn paperback. Their eyes met briefly, and the man smiled. "Good book?" Jonathan asked, surprising himself. The man held it up. "Man's Search for Meaning" by Viktor Frankl. "Changed my life once. Might change it again." Jonathan must have looked curious because the man continued. "It's about a psychiatrist who survived the concentration camps, lost everything, family, freedom, nearly his life. But he discovered something profound. They could take everything from him except one thing, his ability to choose his response, his attitude, his meaning." The man paused, studying Jonathan. "You look like someone who's lost something important." "Everything. I lost everything." The old man nodded knowingly. "Then you're in the perfect position to find what actually matters." His name was Samuel, retired teacher, widower, living on a modest pension in a rent-controlled apartment. And over the next 3 months, he became the mentor Jonathan never knew he needed. They met 3 times a week at that same cafe, talked for hours about life, meaning, identity, and the art of rebuilding from ruins. Samuel had lost his wife of 40 years to cancer, lost his savings in a medical crisis, lost the home they had built together. "I thought losing her would kill me," Samuel told him. "And in a way, it did. It killed the version of me that thought happiness came from external things, from having what I wanted."
What emerged from that death was someone who understood. We are not what we have. We are what we choose to do with what remains. Jonathan started a practice Samuel suggested. Every morning, before the shame and regret could flood in, he would write 3 things he still had control over that day. At first, it felt impossible. What did he control? Nothing. Everything was gone. But Samuel pushed him. You control your next breath. You control whether you treat yourself with kindness or cruelty. You control whether you take a step forward or stay frozen. Those are not small things, Jonathan. Those are everything. Day 1, he wrote, "I can control getting out of bed. I can control making coffee. I can control being honest with myself." It felt trivial, pathetic even. A billionaire reduced to celebrating getting out of bed. But Samuel smiled when Jonathan shared it. That's not reduction, that's foundation. You're learning to build from the ground up instead of from the ego down. The first major lesson hit Jonathan during their 4th week together. Samuel asked him a simple question. Who were you before you became successful? Jonathan opened his mouth to answer and realized he had no idea. I was a kid from the Bronx, poor, angry, determined to prove everyone wrong. And did you? Samuel asked. Did you prove them wrong? Jonathan thought about it. I proved I could make money. I proved I could build an empire. But I never stopped being that angry kid. I just covered him up with expensive suits and power. So you spent 30 years running from a version of yourself you were ashamed of, Samuel said gently, building monuments to prove you weren't him anymore. But you never actually healed him, never actually accepted him. And now, with the monuments gone, there he is, still hurting, still needing your attention. Jonathan felt tears sting his eyes. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to accept that I came from nothing and might return to nothing. Samuel leaned forward. You cannot rebuild your life until you make peace with where you came from. That angry kid, he's not your enemy. He's the part of you that survived. Honor him. Thank him. Then gently tell him we don't need to prove anything anymore. The second lesson emerged when Jonathan started volunteering at a youth center in his old neighborhood. At first, it was Samuel's idea. Go back to where you started, he said. Not to show off, not to teach from authority, but to remember what it felt like to be young and hungry and searching. Jonathan was terrified. What if someone recognized him? What if they threw his failure in his face? But he went anyway. He met a 16-year-old named Marcus who reminded Jonathan of himself at that age. Brilliant, ambitious, desperate to escape poverty. I'm going to be rich, Marcus told him with fierce certainty. I'm gonna make so much money that no one can ever look down on me again." Jonathan saw himself in those words and felt his heart break. "Can I tell you something?" he asked Marcus. "Something I wish someone had told me when I was your age?" Marcus shrugged, but listened. "Money won't fix what you're really afraid of. I made billions, billions, and I was still afraid, still felt inadequate, still felt like I had to prove something, because I thought success was about what I could accumulate. But real success, the kind that actually brings peace, is about who you become in the process." Marcus frowned. "That's easy for you to say. You probably never went hungry." Jonathan smiled sadly. "I grew up 3 blocks from here, went to bed hungry more nights than I can count, wore the same shoes until they fell apart. I know exactly what you're feeling." "Then how did you get out?" Marcus asked. "I fought. I clawed. I sacrificed everything. And I did get out. I got everything I thought I wanted, but I lost something more important along the way." "What?" "Myself. My humanity. My ability to connect with people without wondering what they wanted from me. My peace of mind. I spent 30 years winning and losing myself at the same time." Marcus looked confused. Jonathan continued. "You can make money, Marcus. You should. There's nothing noble about poverty. But don't make money your god. Don't sacrifice your integrity, your relationships, your health, your soul on the altar of success. Because I promise you, the view from the top is empty if you climbed there alone." The third lesson came during a brutal moment Jonathan had been avoiding. His daughter, Emily, agreed to see him. She was 28 now, hadn't spoken to him in over a year, even before the collapse. They met in a park. The tension was immediate. "Why did you want to see me?" she asked, her voice cold. Jonathan had prepared a speech, explanations, justifications, but sitting across from the daughter he barely knew, all of that fell away. "Because I owe you the truth, and an apology." Emily's expression didn't change. "I wasn't a good father," Jonathan continued. "I was barely present. Even when I was physically there, I was thinking about work, about deals, about proving I was successful. You needed a dad, and I gave you a bank account. You needed time, and I gave you money. I thought providing was love, but I was wrong." Emily's eyes welled up. "Do you know what it's like to grow up with a father who's never really there, who looks through you at business meetings happening in his head, who shows up to school plays but leaves at intermission for a call?" Jonathan felt the full weight of it. "No, I don't know what that's like, because my father died when I was 8. I told myself I was doing better than him by being alive and providing, but I was doing the same thing, abandoning you, just in a different way." Emily wiped her eyes. "Why? Why was work more important than me?" "It wasn't," Jonathan said quietly. "But I was terrified that if I slowed down, if I stopped achieving, I would become worthless, and that fear consumed me. It consumed everything." They sat in silence. Then Emily asked the question that changed everything. "Are you still that person, or did losing everything change you?" Jonathan thought carefully. "I'm not that person anymore, not because I don't want to be, but because I can't be. The life I built is gone. The identity I performed is shattered. What's left is just me, flawed, broken, trying to figure out who I actually am underneath all the ambition and fear." "And who is that?" Emily asked. Jonathan smiled sadly. "I'm still discovering, but I know this. I want to be someone you could be proud of. Not because I'm successful, but because I'm honest, because I'm present, because I finally understand what actually matters." Emily didn't forgive him that day, but something softened. "I need time," she said, "but I'm willing to see who you become." It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a door opening. The fourth lesson hit Jonathan like a revelation during his 6th month post-collapse. Samuel asked him, "If you could never rebuild your wealth, never clear your name, never return to the life you had, could you be happy?" Jonathan's first instinct was no, absolutely not. How could he be happy with nothing? But Samuel pressed him. Sit with it, really sit with it. Imagine you remain exactly as you are now, Modest apartment, limited resources, anonymity. Could you build a meaningful life from here? Jonathan spent a week wrestling with that question, and slowly, surprisingly, the answer became yes. I've connected with more real people in 6 months than I did in 30 years of success, he told Samuel. I've had conversations that actually matter. I've helped kids like Marcus without needing them to know my name. I've started to repair my relationship with Emily. I've learned to sit with myself without needing constant validation from the world. That's not nothing. Samuel smiled. That's everything. You've discovered what most people spend their whole lives missing. You are not what you achieve. You are not your bank account or your reputation or your past. You are the sum of your choices in each present moment. And those choices, that's what you truly own. The fifth and final lesson came a year after the collapse. Jonathan was walking through the city when he saw a young man in an expensive suit, phone pressed to his ear, face tight with stress. Jonathan recognized that look, that energy, that desperate hunger for more. He wanted to stop the man, shake him, tell him, it won't satisfy you, it won't fill the void, it won't make you whole. But he knew the man wouldn't listen. Jonathan hadn't listened either when he was that person. Instead, Jonathan kept walking, and he realized something profound. He didn't miss that life. Not the money, not the power, not the prestige. What he missed was the illusion of control. The belief that if he just achieved enough, he would finally feel secure. But security doesn't come from what you have. It comes from accepting that everything is temporary. Everything can be lost, and you are still whole. 2 years after the collapse, Jonathan started a small nonprofit. Not to rebuild his empire, not to restore his reputation, but to genuinely help people transitioning out of crisis. Bankruptcy, job loss, identity collapse. He lived simply, modestly, had dinner with Emily once a week, mentored kids like Marcus, met Samuel at the cafe every Tuesday. His income was a fraction of what it used to be. His name largely forgotten by the world that once celebrated him. But for the first time in his life, Jonathan Pierce was truly alive. One evening, Emily asked him the question that closed the circle. "Dad, if you could go back and prevent the collapse, would you?" Jonathan looked at his daughter, really looked at her. For the first time, seeing not what he had failed to be, but who they were becoming together. Honestly, Emily, no, because that collapse didn't destroy me. It freed me. It broke open a shell I had built around myself. A shell made of money and power and fear. And what emerged was someone I actually like. Someone who can sit with himself without needing the world's approval. Someone who can love without keeping score. Someone who finally understands. The only wealth that matters is the richness of your inner life. The untold story of a fallen billionaire is not about loss. It's about liberation. It's about discovering that everything you thought defined you was just costume. And underneath, there's a human being who was always enough. Jonathan lost $50 billion, lost his empire, lost his reputation. But he gained something priceless, himself. Not the self he performed for the world, but the self that existed before ambition and after collapse. The self that was always there, just waiting to be noticed. So ask yourself, who are you beneath your achievements? Who are you when the performance ends? That's not a thought experiment. That's the most important question you will ever answer. Because life will test you. Success is fragile. Loss is inevitable. But who you choose to be when everything falls away, that's the only thing that truly belongs to you. That's the untold story worth living. If this story moved you, subscribe for more journeys of transformation. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, you are not what you have. You are not what you've lost. You are what remains. And what remains is always, always enough.